Hey guys, this is Eckhartsladder. Hello and welcome to another video over here on X2. Now, I'm recording this before seeing the trailer for Halo Infinite, which is supposed to release tomorrow. So, future people, let me know. How was it? Is it what you guys were expecting? I do know that Charlie, Corey, Mark, and I will be streaming our reaction to the entire Xbox event. So, if you want to watch the VOD of that, you can probably find it on the YouTube channel. Now, before I get into things, I've got a ton of Squadron content already on this channel and Eckhartsladder. I've got a general breakdown over on the main channel, and over here I've got some uninterrupted fleet battles footage and 5 insane details that I saw when playing the game. Today, however, I wanted to talk about something that I've seen brought up time and time again in reference to Star Wars Squadron, and that is the fact that people are saying, well, this is basically just StarFighter Assault 2.0, or some even saying this isn't really worth buying because they basically just excised the worst part from BattleFront 2 and made it its own game with some slight upgrades. First of all, for me, StarFighter Assault was my favorite part of BattleFront 2, but I still understand the skepticism because, to be completely honest, that is sort of how I felt before playing the game. However, after having spent about 3 hours playing Star Wars Squadrons and talking to the devs over at Motive in EA, I can confirm that this game is far more than Star Wars Battlefront 2.5 or StarFighter Assault version 2. This is, however, the comment that I saw the very most, I would say, at least the most common negative comment that I saw about the footage, so I thought I'd take a few seconds to clear it up. Alright, so at the beginning of the play session, I actually asked the devs this question straight up. How much from StarFighter Assault is in Squadrons? Were you working off basically the exact same framework? Were you implementing some new features? How does this work? And the way the Motive team explained it to me, and Motive didn't actually work on StarFighter Assault, is that while the game technically is being built in the same engine, StarFighter Assault is completely separate, and Star Wars Squadrons was built completely from the ground up. Now, I don't have the exact wording because we weren't allowed to record our conversations with the dev. I should have admittedly taken better notes, but I believe he said that the only thing they took from StarFighter Assault really was how some of the ship's AI worked. I don't think this is actually for the capital ships. Based on what I would play, I'd say it's sort of in the dozens of fighters that populate the battlefield. And once you play the game, you can absolutely 1000% tell that this is a completely different system. I mean, you could tell me that it was in a different engine and I would completely believe it. So there are a few things that are especially different. The first would be ship movement. Not only is there a different control scheme, especially on controller, but the way the ships handle is radically different. If you ever play StarFighter Assault, for example, you'll know that your fighters can't just completely cut engines, turn around and move sort of without thrust. At best, they can move sort of slowly, but not much more than that. In Star Wars Squadrons, however, you can cut your engines completely, you can rotate around while not moving, you can change your speed very dynamically, cutting your engines immediately during a boost, for example, and you also just have a lot more sort of fine movement controls. Like, it's a lot easier to take sharp turns and navigate through debris in Star Wars Squadrons, and that comes not only from the much better and more fluid control system, but also how in, for example, the game treats collisions. Most of you guys know in StarFighter Assault, if you hit a barrier, and a lot of those barriers are just invisible walls, you will be destroyed immediately. I noticed that the physical hit boxes for things are much more accurate to their real position. I actually remember flying within the sort of brim trench of a Star Destroyer, and the hitboxes were so good that I technically wasn't touching anything and I could fly just safely. Now, if you actually do hit something, instead of just exploding immediately, if you have enough health, depending on the speed and the angle, you won't be destroyed immediately, but you might bounce off. Now, if you're ramming your A-wing straight into the bridge of a Star Destroyer, which of course you can actually do and it will cause damage, your ship most likely will be destroyed if it's a head-on collision. But if you're just driving through some sort of steel girders and you accidentally bump one, you'll probably get shaken around a bit, you'll probably lose some hull points, but you won't die. It's like every single system in the game is just so much more sophisticated and there's so much room for interaction on a sort of user level. I mean, I get the similarities, but it would be like saying that Mario 64 is the same game as Mario 3. Both are great in their own way, both sort of deal with the same central thing, but one is far more sophisticated and complex than the other. Another good example of how the game is different than StarFighter Assault has to do with just the amount of micromanaging in the way that you control systems inside the craft, and that was something that was totally absent from Star Wars Battlefront II. I was kind of disappointed with how abilities work. Basically, you use the ability immediately and it sort of just has this status effect on your ship, or it fires ammunition. However, a lot of being successful in Squadrons has to do with, for example, micromanaging power systems. Are you going to pull back on thrust at the right point so that you can make a turn really sharply, or do you want to cut back on everything so that you can pump your shields up and make a run on a Star Destroyer? Similarly, you can shunt power between the front and back shields, you can do lots of cool maneuvers, you can more heavily customize the loadout of your ships. When we were playing, for example, each ship type had 3 separate classes, so you could have like an anti-fighter Y-wing, or a heavy bomber Y-wing, or a Y-wing that's just loaded up with everything but very slow, and that degree of customization certainly was not available in Star Wars Battlefront II, which I did quite like. It's an enjoyable game, but it's just nowhere near the depth and really the fun of Squadrons. Another big difference is just how the game is structured. For example, I noticed that spawns in Star Wars Squadron were a lot better than they were in Battlefront 2. For one, I think there's a brief flicker of invincibility, so even if you are being shot at, you won't die immediately, which is nice and something that most games sort of implement. But I also noticed that you were spawning closer in towards the battle, but somehow more protected. Some of that probably has to do with map design, others is just a spawning system that probably got a little bit more dev time. Another thing that's different and improved in Squadrons is sort of balancing. We know that in Star Wars Battlefront 2, the balancing was really just more one ship is more defended than the other, the interceptor is a little faster than the fighters and the bombers, and the fighter is a good mix of all 3. That of course is still the basic breakdown in Squadrons, but the distinction between each class and each specialization is much more nuanced. More than that, unlike in Battlefront 2, the Empire and the New Republic do not have the same ships, because if you remember, the TIE Fighter in Star Wars Battlefront 2 was just as strong as the X-Wing. That's definitely not the case here. Each ship is unique in its own way, and balancing is sort of accomplished by a combination of lots of things. You have to take in everything from account. The fact that a TIE Fighter has a more narrow field of view and a large side profile and no shields. You have to somehow make that ship equal to the X-Wing without just doing a carbon copy, which I think, as we see in Battlefront 2, is ultimately pretty unsatisfying. I spent a lot of time playing as a TIE Interceptor, and it felt very, very different than an A-Wing. So far I think we've covered the fact that there's a lot more complexity in this game, there was a lot more detail given to the control methods, and the ships just feel a lot better the way they handled, and I think all of that is to be expected. I mean, this is a dedicated space combat game. StarFighter Assault was sort of a side mode for Battlefront 2, and one that didn't even impact the main gameplay, which was the ground-based combat. I've only got a couple more things to say. First is that there's a lot more thought given to the metagame in Star Wars Squadrons. Like, I think there's something like 80 unlockable different ship components, and then a whole bunch of visual customizations as well, and the gameplay in the different modes are a lot more involved. Even something like dogfight mode has health pickups and stuff kind of thrown along the map, but when you get to fleet battles, well, that is much, much more complex. You've got 3 different types of capital ships flying around the battlefield, you've got a morale system which affects the tides of battle, and ultimately, although the final objective is still blowing something up like it always was in Battlefront 2, it does feel like there's a lot more tactics involved with that. You don't just have to switch to bombers and hit the target when you have the option. And it's not just other players you're fighting against either, because when you go on against that capital ship, if you're not flying smart, and that means going in really fast, hitting the enemy and then leaving, you will get shredded by the Star Destroyer's laser cannons and turbo lasers. It's not like Battlefront 2 where you'll be sitting in front of a target and just blasting away at it for, 5 minutes until it's destroyed. So hopefully that clears all of it up for you guys, and I will say, although I am comparing Star Wars Squadrons very, very favorably to Star Wars Battlefront 2 and StarFighter Assault, I actually loved that game mode. It was my favorite in Battlefront 2. I would guess I put a couple hundred hours into the mode in total, and I think if EA hadn't seen that there was at least some sort of cult following for StarFighter Assault, this game might not exist. So I don't want to rip on StarFighter Assault at all. I think it was really fun. I think Squadrons probably learned a lot from the game, even if they aren't directly taking, you know, how they built the game itself on a technical level, but I hope that all makes sense. Anyway, until next time, guys, this has been Eckhartsladder. Have a good one, and may the Force be with you.